What's happening, guys? Joe Tendo coming back with another video. Now, today we are going to be covering a question that I get asked quite a lot on stream, and that is, which is the best controller to use with the Nintendo Switch? Now, before I get into describing and telling you about each controller, I want to make it clear that there is no one fits all. All the games can be very different. But what I'm going to attempt to do is cover the best all-round controller. Okay, so first up, we have your classic JoyCons. Everybody has a set because they are attached to your console, or detached in this case. So on the whole, I like this controller a lot, even though it is a bit small and the sticks are not fantastic. Now, the problem with the JoyCon controller is that a lot of people have had DriftCon issues. So that's where the analog sticks drift without any inputs. So your controller will be getting inputs without you actually making any inputs. Now, Nintendo does fix this, but I've heard a lot of horror stories about people having them fixed and then being returned only to have the same problem within a few weeks. So this D-pad is all separate buttons. That's very important for not getting false inputs in platforming games especially. I don't want to say too many bad things about the Joy-Con controller because it is so versatile with what it does, and it has motion controls built in. I understand that it's supposed to be for the fun and versatile use of the Switch. So I would say if you're a fairly casual gamer, then on the whole, you're probably not going to need to get a pad. Okay, so next up we have the Switch Pro controller. Now, this controller is pretty expensive, but it is extremely comfortable and looks a lot more like the mainstream controllers you would see on rival consoles. Now, I love using this controller with Mario Maker, but I switched to using analog sticks last year. The D-pad on this pad is poor, so if you're looking for a pad that has a really good D-pad, this one is not it. But for everything else, it's fantastic. I did find that I was getting false inputs when holding right or left, and the D-pad also pressing up and down occasionally. And to be honest, it's probably the worst D-pad of any of the... controllers I've used. But on the flip side of that, in my opinion, it is the most comfortable for everything else. Okay, so next up we have the 8BitDo SF30 controller. Now, this controller might look pretty familiar to you. It might remind you of the Super Nintendo controller from back in the day. So straight off the bat, it might feel very comfortable to some users. But one of the advantages of this over the original pads is you have the 4 shoulder buttons, and the L2 and R2 are very, very comfortable. Now, I find on the whole, the D-pad on this is quite good, but it is not perfect. You will still get some false inputs. I do on Mario Maker, but I've used it for Super Mario World, and I use it for ROM hacks, and I have to say, on the whole, pretty good, pretty solid. Now, I know there is a newer version of this, but I hear there are people that are still getting some false inputs, so that's something to bear in mind. But everything else, down to the sticks and the buttons, feels comfortable, and it works very well. Okay, so next up we have the Power A GameCube style controller. Now, obviously, if you've held a GameCube controller, you're going to feel very at home with this. One of the main differences is there has an L and an R instead of the just classic Z as you'd be used to on the original controller. You will note the D-pad is also a bit larger than you were used to on the original GameCube pad. On the whole, the controller feels very solid, but one of the big drawbacks is it doesn't have a rechargeable battery unlike the others, and you have to use AA batteries. So I bought this for use with Super Smash Bros. Because that's what I'm used to playing with since the Melee days, and I have to say I'm not disappointed, although I did have to send it back because the C-stick was working intermittently, but they did send out a new one as it was in its year's warranty. On the whole, it's a pretty good pad, and I've used it for other games like Mario Kart, but I only really use this for Super Smash Bros. And I feel like it is quite niche, so it's probably not one to consider for an all-round option. So last but not least, we have the Pokken Tournament controller. Now, you can get this in the Switch version or the Wii U version. It doesn't really matter. They're both the same. They both plug in via USB. So that's the first thing you got to remember, is that this pad is not wireless. So this is the pad I bought to use for Mario Maker because, in my opinion, it is the best D-pad in the market. It still gives some false inputs for myself, but I found it was the best D-pad I could utilize at the time. But if you want to play platformers with a D-pad, I would recommend getting the Pokken Tournament controller. But again, because of its lack of analog, and because it only has one L and one R button, it is definitely not an all-round controller, but I would consider it if you're a fan of the D-pad and playing platform. Okay, so my pick of all the pads is the Switch Pro controller. Now, I know this is expensive, but in my opinion, it's worth every penny for everything except the D-pad. I've had absolutely zero issues with this, and the battery lasts a very long time. If you are looking for a comfortable controller with a decent D-pad, you can't really go wrong with the Pokken tournament controller. But do remember, this is wired. So for ROM hacks and classic games, I do like the SF30, although I do find that the D-pad is not quite as consistent as the Pokken tournament controller. If you're a casual gamer, then the Joy-Cons will be fine, but it might not suit you if you play more or your hands are quite large. If you're feeling flush and you loved Smash Brothers from back in the day on the GameCube, I don't think you'll be disappointed in lumping on the PowerA Switch, but like I say, this is very, very specialist. You can use it with the other games, but I've only ever used it with Super Smash Brothers. And don't forget, it only takes batteries. Alright guys, thanks a lot for watching. I am planning on doing more videos like this and more how-to videos in the future. All the social media is in the description. Please go and follow my Twitch channel. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.